The courtroom was buzzing with anticipation as the judge, a man notorious for his sharp tongue, prepared to hear the case of Karoline Leavitt, a rising star in the political world. She had been called to testify in a high-profile case that had captivated the nation. However, no one expected the confrontation that would unfold today. Judge Samuel Grant had a reputation for being dismissive, especially towards those he thought were using their political clout to avoid the law. He had already made it clear to his colleagues that he wasn't impressed by Leavitt's rising fame in Washington, and he had little patience for her show of confidence. As she stepped up to the witness stand, the judge wasted no time in launching into his usual routine of sharp remarks. "Ms. Leavitt," Judge Grant began, his voice dripping with mockery, "I trust you're not here to turn this courtroom into another one of your political rallies. We are here to deal with facts, not speeches." Karoline, undeterred by his tone, gave him a calm, but firm nod. The judge's attempt at intimidation failed to rattle her. She was no stranger to high-pressure situations, and this courtroom, despite its cold, marble walls, was not nearly as intimidating as the backrooms of Washington, D.C. But the judge wasn't done. "I imagine your supporters are outside, eagerly waiting for you to show off that charming smile of yours. Well, let's get through this quickly, shall we?" he added, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. Karoline could feel the eyes of the courtroom on her, sensing the judge's attempt to undermine her. Yet, she remained unfazed. She had more to offer than a mere political performance. She was prepared to speak her truth. Karoline could feel the tension in the room, a slow burn of contempt directed at her from the judge. But she was no rookie when it came to high-stakes confrontations, and she was determined to hold her ground. Judge Grant continued his mocking tone, his eyes scanning the papers in front of him as if he were entirely uninterested in what she had to say. He looked up at her only occasionally, as though expecting her to stumble or make a mistake. "Tell me, Ms. Leavitt," he sneered, "how does it feel to be a rising star in your little political circus? I assume you'd like to take a shot at becoming a senator one day, but let's make sure you don't forget the basics of the law while doing so, Karoline felt a flicker of irritation behind her calm demeanor, but she kept her voice steady as she responded. "I'm here to answer your questions, Judge Grant, not to entertain you." The judge smirked. "Oh, I'm quite entertained already." A few chuckles rippled through the gallery. Karoline could sense the growing hostility in the room, but she remained focused. She had been in rooms full of hostile people before, but this felt different. There was a weight in the air, as if something was about to shift. As the questioning continued, Karoline noticed something strange. The judge's eyes flickered toward the door, and his smirk faded, replaced by a brief look of unease. But only for a second. He quickly composed himself and tried to maintain control of the room, but the undercurrent of tension had noticeably changed. Karoline could feel it, an invisible force pressing against her, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She knew the judge was trying to provoke her, trying to make her flinch, but she refused to give him that satisfaction. Then, without warning, Karoline stood up from her seat, her movements deliberate and controlled. Her voice was clear, unwavering. "Judge Grant, if you have finished with your theatrics, I have a few things to reveal as well." The courtroom fell silent. All eyes were on her, and for the first time, the judge's smug expression faltered. He raised an eyebrow, unsure of what was coming next. Karoline stood motionless for a moment, the room hanging in suspense. Judge Grant's eyebrow was still arched, a subtle shift of his body as he leaned forward in his chair. He couldn't help but be curious about what she had to say. "Go on, Ms. Leavitt," he taunted, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let's see what you have up your sleeve." Her calm smile remained, but now there was a steely edge to her gaze. She reached into her blazer pocket with a deliberate slowness, each motion measured and precise. The judge watched closely, clearly unsure of what she was doing. Without a word, Karoline withdrew a small leather wallet and opened it in front of the judge. The room held its breath. The metallic glint of a badge caught the light. Karoline placed it on the stand, its engraved seal shining under the fluorescent lights. The silence in the room became deafening. "What's this?" Judge Grant's voice faltered slightly, though he tried to maintain his composure. The badge was unmistakable, and its significance immediately sank into the minds of everyone in the room. It was a Secret Service badge. A ripple of shock spread across the courtroom, and Karoline could see the judge's expression shift from mockery to something far less certain, something closer to fear. "I think you'll find, Judge," she began, her voice still unwavering, "that I'm not just some politician. I have certain responsibilities that extend beyond the scope of this court. I didn't want to reveal this, but I'm left with little choice." The judge's face went pale. His confident demeanor from moments earlier was gone, replaced with an unmistakable tension. He quickly glanced at the security officers stationed at the back of the room, clearly trying to calculate how far this situation had escalated. "Ms. Leavitt," the judge finally stammered, struggling to regain his authority, this is highly irregular. You should have informed the court." "Perhaps, Judge," she said smoothly, "but I didn't think it would be necessary to reveal my identity in such a fashion." Her gaze never wavered from his, and her tone had a finality to it that made it clear there was no going back. The room was now a mix of confusion and wariness, but it was clear that the judge had no idea how to proceed. Karoline's secret had just shifted the balance of power in that courtroom. The room was still, as if frozen in time. Judge Grant's eyes flickered nervously to the security guards standing by the entrance, their posture rigid. It wasn't just Karoline who had drawn their attention now, it was the unspoken tension that hung in the air, the sudden awareness that this situation had become far more complicated than anyone had anticipated. Karoline's hand remained steady, the Secret Service badge still placed on the stand, glinting ominously under the courtroom lights. The judge's expression was a mixture of disbelief and regret. His attempt to undermine her had just backfired in a way that he couldn't have foreseen. You're with the Secret Service?" Judge Grant stammered, his arrogance replaced by uncertainty. "Yes, Judge," Karoline replied, her voice sharp and unwavering. "As a representative of the federal government, I'm not just an ordinary witness. My presence here today, and my willingness to answer your questions, is contingent upon the laws that govern this nation. Laws that I've sworn an oath to protect." The judge shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly trying to recover, but the stakes were higher now. The room seemed to close in on him as the weight of her words settled in. The quiet hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening now. The courtroom wasn't just a place for political games anymore, it had become a battlefield. Karoline took a deep breath and continued, her voice calm but with an edge of finality. "I understand the power of this court, Judge. But understand this, my role as a government agent gives me certain protections. And I'm not afraid to remind you of them if necessary." There was a murmur in the gallery. Some looked shocked, others whispered to one another, and a few exchanged knowing glances. The reputation of Judge Grant, known for his sharp tongue and his attempts to intimidate witnesses, was slowly crumbling in front of everyone. For a moment, Karoline let the silence stretch, making sure every eye in the room was on her. "Now," she said, breaking the tension, "let's get back to the matter at hand. You wanted to question me, Judge. I'm ready. But this time, let's make sure we stick to the facts." The judge's eyes narrowed. He was a man of power, accustomed to controlling the narrative, but now he found himself unsure. For the first time in his career, his control was slipping, and it was evident to everyone in the room. He cleared his throat, attempting to regain some semblance of authority. "Very well," he muttered, though his voice was no longer as firm as it had been moments before. "Proceed, Ms. Leavitt. But know this, your actions today will not go unnoticed." Karoline didn't flinch. "I'm sure they won't, Judge." The courtroom was no longer the same. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and Karoline had made it clear that no one, not even a judge, was immune from accountability. The rest of the questioning was subdued. Judge Grant, once confident in his ability to control the proceedings, now struggled to maintain his composure. Karoline's revelations had completely changed the atmosphere in the room. The moment the Secret Service badge had been revealed, the game had shifted entirely. And now, the judge was merely going through the motions, trying to recover what little authority he had left. Karoline, however, was calm, methodical in her responses, her presence unshaken. She knew this was more than just a court case, it was a message. She was no longer just a political figure or a mere witness, she was a force to be reckoned with. The final questions were asked, and Karoline answered them with precision, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Judge Grant sat in silence, scribbling notes, his face pale. For the first time in years, he was no longer the one in control. As the proceedings came to an end, Karoline stood and gathered her things. She picked up the badge from the stand, her fingers grazing over it for a moment. She knew what it meant. And she knew the message it sent. When she turned to leave, she paused at the door, glancing back at the judge. The entire courtroom was watching, the tension thick in the air. "You'll do well to remember today, Judge," she said softly, her voice carrying across the silent room. "The law works for everyone. Even those who think they're above it." And with that, she walked out, her steps echoing in the now still courtroom. Outside, the reporters were waiting, eager to get a statement from her. Karoline didn't give them the satisfaction. She knew this moment would resonate far beyond the walls of the courthouse. The secret was out, and her power, no longer hidden, was undeniable. Judge Grant, meanwhile, would have to deal with the aftermath of this encounter. The whispers would follow him, and his reputation, once ironclad, would forever carry the stain of his miscalculation. He had underestimated Karoline Leavitt, and in doing so, had exposed his own vulnerabilities. As Karoline entered her car, she finally allowed herself a small, knowing smile. This was far from over. This was only the beginning.